All right, let me quickly go into our week 3 module. So let me again really quickly pull up the peer group presentation. So at this point, have we all had an opportunity to take a look at the peer group? Well, not peer group, I'm sorry, the peer presentations. Let me pull up the assignment sheet. If you haven't had an opportunity to view the, sorry you guys, it's not letting me share it. Let me try one more time. If you have not had an opportunity to view the assignments, let me just pull it up one more time to remind you guys of the peer presentation assignment. So this handout is posted in the module. It lays out the week assignment. So it'll let you know what week you are presenting. So you guys know that this is week 3. Week 5 is the first presentation. That's listed as Dahia. Let me see, is she here today? All right, I don't see her. So let me be very honest with you guys about this. There are about 6-7 students enrolled in the class, but regularly there may be about 4 or 5 of us who regularly attend, kind of check in. So expect that there may be some changes to this schedule. And what I mean by that is, let's say, for instance, a particular student who is on the schedule who perhaps may be presenting week 5. I'll try to let you guys know a week out, so a week ahead of time, if perhaps your scheduled presentation may have to move up. So what I would do just to kind of offset that, start now in terms of planning. Again, let me show you. So here you guys will see on the screen is the assignment. But not only does it lay out the peer presentation assignment, it kind of lays out what the presentation should cover. So again, even though this is week 3, some of you aren't presenting until weeks 8 or even later. Still plan, have a contingency plan, because in the case that some of my more irregular students may not show up, your presentation may be moved up. So I'll keep you guys informed of that. I'll do my best to let you know a week out if there are any changes, but again, try to, if you can, prepare for that. So if you may be listed, let's say at like week 9 or 10, there's a possibility you may go week 8. So just, keep that in mind, you guys. So try not to wait until the very last minute to start the research that will be required for your presentations, okay? So one of the good resources for presentations is the anthology. So I don't know if we all have the anthology text. Do we all have access to the Norton Anthology, Contemporary African American Text? Do we all have this book?
I have it.
Okay, Robin. Anyone still waiting on your book, perhaps? Shall I take silence to assume we do not have our books? If you don't have the book, your research will be an online research. And I won't say I don't know how dependable that is, but you'll definitely need to investigate the information you encounter online. For those of you who have the book, who are waiting on the book, who know it's coming, use the anthology as your first go-to. So for each movement that's listed here, there is a chapter in the anthology that introduces that movement. I recommend we start there first because it tends to focus the movement on literature because it's in this anthology. Whereas if you were to go seek it outside, so let's say, for instance, Harlem Renaissance, well, that really encapsulated the Black aesthetic. So it will take you outside of literature. It's art associated with that, music associated with that. Let's say I'm not sure theater. I don't think there's a lot of theater related to the Harlem Renaissance. But if you were to search that, let's say just a standard Google search, it can take you into other, areas. So use the anthology as your first go-to, and then from there it can introduce you to, let's say, contributors of that movement that you then can kind of open up your research outside of that. So use this to help with the, again, that foundational research, at least giving you a working definition of what that movement is, um, dates, timelines, etc. Okay, so if you haven't checked this out under module 3, please make sure you guys are doing so. I'm going to make it the student's responsibility. If you have any questions about your presentation, if you're unclear of the guidelines or expectations, let me know, and try, if you can, to let me know before your presentation. Okay, so that we can work out any issues, that may arise. Okay, so
I have
are
a
we clear
question.
on what we're doing with the peer presentations, you guys? Did we have any questions?
I do.
Okay, yes, Tasha.
For it to be, you said 10 to 15 minutes. So for that means like about 8 slides if it's a presentation.
That's a good question. I would say eight minimum, but here's the thing. It will really be up to the students. Some students pack a lot on slides. Some students may take me a point per slide. So I don't want to prescribe a slide count, but I think if you were, let's say, timing it like you just pointed out, Tasha, 8 could be good. I would say maybe more important than the slide count is what you guys are putting into it. So as long as you're covering these bullet points, if it's less than
Okay.
8 slides, if you may perhaps even fall under the 15 minutes or so, as long as we're knocking out these, um, the expected guidelines, as long as we're making sure we give that history, background, definition, introduction, as long as we're bringing in, a notable contributor or a notable, um, text or representative piece. And as long as we take some time to analyze that, um, put it in its proper context with the movement, then I'm fine. But I can just tell you, just based on, having done this in the past, I haven't seen students really go under time. So if you guys think it sounds like a lot with 10 to 15 minutes, normally I'm telling you, if it's about 3 minutes per section, you could get to 10 minutes pretty easy. So 8 slides, I would say would work fine, Tasha. But here's something else I plan to do too. I have a couple of samples, so I can kind of start to lay out samples for you guys to give you a better idea of what it may look like. But something else that can help too is time. As you guys are building your presentations, give it a run through. I had students who would, well, back when it was a peer group exercise, they would time each other, kind of making sure that they stay within those time constraints. If they find out that they were really under that, they knew to add more information. So it's going to take proper planning. So just making sure you guys outline that. All right, so I think I saw Dahia come in. Okay, good. So you see here on the assignment, week 5. So right now we're at the end of week 3. So it's really kind of letting you know about 2 weeks to set up that Harlem Renaissance presentation. Okay. If you again have any concerns or issues, do your best, you guys, to let me know prior to your presentation. Okay, so we can make the necessary adjustments. All right, and we'll talk about this again as I bring in samples in the coming weeks. Okay. All right, putting this aside for now. Let me stop share for just a second. I think I want to go back to our Brightspace page. So let me start us from our discussion of David Walker's appeal. And because we are, again, kind of closing out that discussion of the slave narrative, I want us to view this text using those same elements and themes that we have discussed over the past week and a half about the slave narrative. So again, we know certain things about audience in terms of a specific audience, more so white audience, right? We also know that the slave narrative was designed to um, really speak about the ills of slavery in order to persuade, the reading audience to disavow it, really to spark them into action. So we know the purpose and the themes of the slave narrative, and that's what make David Walker's appeal slightly different. So if you guys know what we've talked about before in terms of Frederick Douglass, um, in terms of Francis E.W. Harper, um, there has been a model that we have become familiar with, but it starts to change with the introduction of David Walker's appeal. We're going to also talk about Sojourner Truth's Ain't I a Woman today. So we see the slave narrative start to morph. So when we last saw each other on Monday, I introduced um, a way of us approaching the slave narrative. So we've talked about elements, we've talked about themes, but the slave narrative can be categorized um, according to accommodation. So you have those slave narratives that were all about accommodation. Since I'm telling the story of my life as slave, I am kind of accepting this fate. I am doing my best to be the best slave that I can be, right? We see that writing. If you guys are familiar with Phyllis Wheatley, we also then see in the slave narrative through the writing of Frederick Douglass, Harriet Jacobs, which we haven't really reviewed in this class yet, but we see protests start to make its way into the slave narrative. So this idea of protest was always present, but we see where the slave or the writer of the slave narrative themselves began to move outside of this identified white audience. They are, in giving their narrative and telling their story, they are speaking between the lines to their, brothers and sisters, their slaves free or, those still enslaved. So there is a shift in the slave narrative from accommodation to protest. And eventually we move from protest to escape. So what David Walker's appeal represents is it represents one of the earliest forms of protest literature. Okay. So before we really kind of get into the post reading questions that I posted for you guys, we know anytime we read, we always take it through a critical analysis. And one of the ways that I do that is by looking at the author. Who is the author? When was this particular text published? What was going on politically and socially around us that perhaps may have influenced the text? So I want to start there before we really go into what you guys took away from the text. So did anybody look up who David Walker is? Did we do any, digging into the author of this text?
What was the question again? It was kind of breaking up when you were talking.
Oh, I'm sorry, Robin. Okay, so in looking at this text, we know we always start with, looking at the context, right? Who is the author? What do they bring to this argument? What was going on in the world politically and socially at this time that he may be responding to? So did you guys look up David Walker? Did you kind of do any, digging into the context of this text?
I didn't look him up, but I would assume that at the time, slavery was still going on. People were still being brutalized. It seemed like it was early in the time of protest or slavery, because he kept referring to Thomas Jefferson
Okay.
as if he were saying Black people aren't equally people in the moment when he was writing it.
Right. Okay, good. So I'm glad you brought that up, Robin. He's responding to, so context is really important. I'm glad you picked up on the time frame. So it was earlier. David Walker himself, he was born in 1796 and he died in 1830. So he died when he passed away at age 34. We'll talk about that. He was smack dab in the middle of slavery, even though he himself was born as a free man. The fight of slavery, the fight to abolish slavery was his fight as well. He was an abolitionist. He was a writer. He was an anti-slavery activist, which we can kind of see that in the tone of the text. But yeah, so I'm glad you pointed that out. He's writing in response to the growing popularity of Thomas Jefferson and his ideals. And he's also writing in response to Thomas Jefferson's publishing of the letters. What was the name of it? Sorry, look, I lost it for 2 seconds. But he's responding to a recent publication made by Thomas Jefferson. So good. I'm glad that you guys were able to kind of pick that out. But let me fill in the blanks there. So we know that David Walker, he was considered, again, an abolitionist writer, anti-slavery activist. He was born free. Not only was he an abolitionist and activist, he also was a businessman. He owned what's called now a thrift store, but he called it a secondhand shop. He sold clothes to, Boston seamen, sailors. So he was somewhat influential, not just in the political arena, but also in terms of his business acumen. And it was through his business that he was able to distribute this pamphlet. So what you guys read for homework is a excerpt from David Walker's appeal. It was really a much longer appeal, so we only took a little portion of it. But at the time that this was written, it was inflammatory, and especially for reasons that Jayla pointed out. He wanted slaves to rebel against their masters. That's the call of the appeal. He's calling for a revolt. So yeah, you definitely see that there. So you guys can imagine at a time when slavery was still, very real, still happening. The distribution of this pamphlet was, it created panic. It created panic in the, those who were pro-slavery. It created panic because this particular document was distributed not just in the South, which was where David Walker's from Boston. I'm sorry, not just in the North, which is where he's from, but it made its way to the South. And that was through his business of when he would sell clothes, resell clothes, he would include the pamphlet in the pocket. He would sew it into the pocket, or he would sew the pamphlet into the seams so that seaman or that particular customer, sometimes knowingly, but sometimes unknowingly, would get this document. And those who would, after they get it, they would then share it with others. So it is being shared with the public. It is being shared not just with the anti-slavery movement, but also it's making its way down south to those pro-slavery movements. And that was the last thing that, those pro-slavery, group was dead set against. So as a result, let me tell you guys about the significance of this, pamphlet, David Walker's appeal. As a result of the distribution of this text, it says certain states enacted legislation in response to the pamphlet. First of all, making it illegal to circulate the pamphlet. And it also led to the persecution of anyone who engaged in the education of slaves. So this is where we got that law that slaves are forbidden to read and write. It is against the law for them to read and write. And it came from the fear of this, the message in this pamphlet calling for a slave revolt. So really influential at the time. But that background is really important to, getting to the heart of the text. So again, keep in mind, you guys, even with this assignment, with every assignment you guys read in the class, it goes through a critical analysis. You can't read literature, especially African American literature, the way you read everything else. It has to look at who wrote this, when was it written, what was going on in the world socially and politically that informed this text, right? And then, of course, what impact did the text have? So you always have to approach literature through that lens. So just moving forward, you guys, anytime you encounter a text, first of all, I'm looking at who wrote this. Google. All right. Because a lot of times, like I stated in African American Lit, they will hide messages in the text. Sometimes it is not always smacking you in the face. It will be up to you to catch those aha moments, right? And a lot of that is the knowledge of what's going on at that time. What little nod and wink are they making in the writing? So that's really important, part of how you guys read it.
Did he die as a result of this letter or his protest?
That's a good question because it's speculated, yes, speculated that he was poisoned. Although I believe his death was ruled um, he died of tuberculosis. It stated he died of tuberculosis, but yeah, it's believed that he was poisoned. He was told that his life was in danger. He was told that he should perhaps flee Boston and go to Canada. You guys can tell by David Walker's, attitude. He wasn't having none of it. So he wanted to stay firm. He wants to not leave his business. And shortly after, he was found dead in his store. So yeah, it's a mystery. Wink, wink, Robin. Not really a mystery, but I would speculate. Yeah, he was assassinated, even though that is not the official tag. So I'll say that. So that's a good question. And keep in mind, he was 34, very young. And it just reminded me of, activists that we may be familiar with, how Martin Luther King Jr. died very young, Malcolm X, JFK, Medgar Evers, all within those, kind of fighting the same fight. But with that being said, let me share something really quickly before we really go any deeper into this. I really wanted you guys to come prepared to discuss. So I have some post-reading questions I want to share. Hold on, let me drop the link. And what you guys will do is complete them based on your reading. So I'm not anticipating it should take too much time, but we'll start off with about 20 minutes once you guys get it for you to answer the questions and submit them. So hold on one second. Okay. All right, so I'm going to drop the link in chat for our quick post question exercise. And what you guys will do is click on that link, answer, I believe it's 4 questions about the reading really quickly. That's going to help spark up our discussion. And then we'll meet out on the other end, in order to discuss. Make sure that when you guys are completing your answers that at least on the first question, you add your name. It doesn't automatically pick up on your email. So add your name to one of the questions just so I can make sure I give you guys credit. Okay. So have we all accessed the form or the post-reading questions? You should find this particular page. You guys see the page on the screen. This is what that link should take you to. Are we all able to view the page?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay. Is there anyone having trouble? All right, I'll take that silence as that's a no. So I'm going to go ahead and mute myself. Let's take about 20 minutes at max to kind of work out our answers to this, and we'll come out on the other end to discuss. All right, you guys, let's go ahead and get ready to discuss what we submitted in terms of our post-reading questions. Let's see, there are only 3 responses. So keep in mind, if you didn't respond, I'm closing it. So we're not adding any responses after we go over the question. So if your response isn't added now, we're just going to assume that what we have is what we have. Okay. All right. Let's talk about this, you guys. And again, the whole purpose that we went over these post-reading questions is to kind of help spark discussion. So I'll be asking you guys to help me out with your responses, but you'll see that the questions are really asking more, what do you think about the text? So not so much, right or wrong answers, but more so just to get um, your reaction and your ideas about the text. So where it says, what key point from Walker's appeal did you find most compelling? So we know already that in this text, David Walker is, he's making a call, he's calling out for revolt. He is addressing, specifically who he referred to as his brethren, right? To vehemently oppose the ideals, put forth by Thomas Jefferson in his notes on Virginia. One of, by the way, earliest forms of white supremacy. It was, manifesto in defense of, enslaving, Africans specifically. So again, here we see in the appeal, David Walker is responding directly to that text. So what key point from Walker's um, letter did you guys find the most compelling? What did we identify?
And I'm just thinking about that question again. Did you specifically mean a point that he was making, or because I responded, did just his bluntness at considering the time that he was
Oh, I like that. Yeah. Oh, okay. I see that. No. That's good. I like that because when we think about the time, see, this is why it's really important to put it in its proper context. When you think about the time and you think about that, this particular pamphlet was circulated while, slavery was still legal. I think he stated in the letter at the time there were 13 states. So the colonies, they were rapidly building and they were building on the backs of that slavery. So, yeah, like I like that response, Robin. The bluntness was somewhat jarring in that it's so different from what we've seen in the other slave narratives. Now, while Frederick Douglass, he was a little spicy, but Frederick Douglass was still very mindful of, these groups, 2 groups working together, right? Those 2 groups working together in order to kind of, achieve this American dream, right? So Frederick Douglass, again, he was a little bit more open. He was a little bit more hopeful, optimistic. He was blunt in his assessment of Abraham Lincoln, but he still, touted his praises. He still referred to Abraham Lincoln as an honest man. So again, yeah, I agree, Robin. This was he was in so many ways, he was going in. So we'll talk about that too in just a moment. Jalea, you pointed out that you found, the point you found most compelling was that the document, when the document was written, that America is more rightfully blacks than whites. Many people now and today still feel the same with if America is that it is today because of the work African Americans have done. Yeah, so you see in the text where he pointed out, he went to, the heart, or shall I say, the contributions of slavery, the contributions of slaves. And he talked about that in terms of they pretty much are tasked with the building of, these colonies or the country as a whole, and how that you know, kind of shouldn't be minimalized, right? There, we have equal stakes. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. Jalea, he pointed out in the text, you know, he kind of was attempting to um, encourage his brethren, you know, don't kowtow. Now is not the time to be weak. Now is not the time to really, you know, think that this will blow over. It is to kind of recognize the, shall I say, negotiating power that, you know, the slaves could have, you know, based on their contribution. So yeah, he was aware of that. I like that you noticed that. Jayla, you said when he said that he appeals to every man who feels insupportable. I think insupportable is a word that is not used in many liberating texts. Yeah, so he did attempt to establish that common ground in that insupportable, like not only are the ideas he considers insupportable, but also he's making it known to the slaves and free blacks. So again, he's talking to a wider group that there's no point in waiting on someone to come and save us, right? There's no point in waiting on someone to kind of come on our behalf, right? We're a group that's insupportable right now. So it is up to us. So yeah, I found that compelling as well. All right, so let's see how you guys did. The other question, does Walker's appeal connect to any of the other texts that we have read in class? So here I'm asking you guys to make a connection. Were there any moments while you guys were reading the text that you felt, you know, deja vu? This reminds me of another text that we've read or something else that we've talked about. So let me see. Can I? Yeah, so let's see here. So I believe the first one is Robin. So it says, yes, he was persuasive in his attempts to convince his audience that Black people were equally created by gods as white men. He tried to convict the hearts of his audience with scripture and religious content and references. So yeah, so you pointed out that he is, which I know, did we say that he is you know, devout in terms of his religious beliefs, but yeah, he's not listed as being a preacher. So, okay, yeah, so you noticed those references, but what about it reminding you of another text, making a connection to another text? Did you guys find that out? Looks like Jalea said, in connection with other documents that I've read as far, I can say African Americans are still resentful for the wrongdoings of their people. Okay. You say, Jayla, the connection. Okay, so you bring up Riverbank Blues. So that was what we read with Sterling Brown. That was, I think, around week 2. So last week when we were kind of looking at variations, well, this one we were looking at due to the vernacular, right? Due to the impact to Black culture, right? How the slave narrative kind of infused that. So yeah, I'm glad you noticed that. You said, because in the poem, I felt as though the author's message was to keep African Americans from settling for yes. Yes, Jayla, absolutely. Now, in terms of a connection to another text, this is a clear answer in that with the Riverbank Blues text, Sterling Brown was imploring, you know, former slaves to not just sit by the riverbank. Don't just sit and wait on things to get better. Don't just sit, you know, by while, you know, your position is, you know, quickly deteriorating. You know, there's action that you must take. So I definitely agree, Jayla. I didn't make the connection at first, but I absolutely can see how the Riverbank Blues, that Sterling Brown poem, connects to the ideals that David Walker lays out here. Absolutely. What about Christina Sharp's In the Wake? Did you guys see any connection between the ideals that David Walker lays out and ideals that Christina Sharp presented in that text? Did you guys notice any connections? How about in Christina Sharp's The Wake? Um, she talks about the wake kind of being this consciousness, this awareness. Do you guys agree David Walker has an awareness.
Yeah.
He is really looking ahead. He's looking at the future impact of Thomas Jefferson's words and ideals. And that is what he is fighting against. He's fighting against how these ideas will be perceived in the future. So he said in the text, keep in mind that, this man, Thomas Jefferson, he's revered as one of the founding fathers. So what he says is going to carry a lot of weight. And for him to be kind of throwing around things as reckless and as untrue as this, it could really work to put, and he stated, African Americans, former slaves, in a really bad place. So he had an awareness, he had a wokeness that Christina Sharp talks about in The Wake, where the wake is this mindset. It's a mindfulness of um, how race impacts your day-to-day condition. He's aware. So another connection I would make to that would be the Christina Sharp text. Um, all right, and the last question asks you guys to select an adjective that describes Walker's tone in the text. So yeah, I want to talk about tone. And this again, when we talk about reading between the lines, um, African Americans, former slaves, what they were really aware of is their audience. And for the slave narrative, traditionally, the goal was to, of course, clearly make a case about the ills and evils of slavery, but to still make it palatable for a white audience. Now, we don't want to scare them away. We don't want to definitely bring up any talks about revolt. So David Walker issues in a different form of slave narrative. He takes the slave narrative and kind of turns it on its ear. And even though he's not a slave, of course, we know slave narratives can be written not only by former slaves, but also by, of course, free blacks, those abolitionists. But a lot of how that slave may really feel normally is hidden in the author's tone. A lot of time it's hidden in that figurative language. So there is some reading between the lines that, we have to be on the lookout for. So one thing is tone. Let me quickly stop share with this just for a second, because when we think of tone, I want you guys to get a definition in mind. So let me pull up a clear idea of what tone is, because in the literary tradition, when we think about tone in terms of literature, it's a clear definition to consider. So tone, especially in written composition in literature, it is an attitude of a writer toward either the subject that he's talking about or towards an audience. Tone is generally conveyed through the choice of words or the viewpoint of a writer on a particular subject. So one thing I think we can all agree on is, David Walker is making his, first of all, his opinion about Thomas Jefferson. It's not only being verbalized because he's clear in it, but we can also pick up on it in his tone. We can kind of pick up on his attitudes. Since we know tone is all about attitude, we can pick up on his attitude towards not only Jefferson, but towards his writing, towards these, early white supremacist ideals, right? I see I have something in chat. Hold on. Okay. So with that working definition in mind, let me go back to how you guys responded to the question, what was the tone of the text? So let me do a new share and show you guys this. So remember that tone is the attitude that the writer has about the subject or about the audience. And you normally can pick up on tone through choice of words. So you guys were asked to select an adjective that best describes Walker's tone in the text. And I see, Robin, you pointed out aggression. Okay, good. I like that. We'll come back to aggression. The second response, I believe that's Jalea. And Jalea stated that Walker's tone was restful or angry. So we can kind of make a connection between aggression and angry. Okay, I see that. And then Jayla, you said he seemed prideful and stern. So aggression and stern, again, we're within those same um, ideas. So aggression, angry, stern. What else did I see? Prideful. And okay. All right, good. I like this. Um, aggression, angry, stern, prideful. I added that he seemed to really be have an attitude of like he was like incredulous. He just was like, I cannot believe that this is what they think, right? So I could pick up in his tone that he was flabbergasted. He was angry, he was aggressive, he was upset, he was, but he was also very serious and direct in his call to vehemently reject these ideas. So he, if I could pick another adjective, he was vehement. He is very stern in calling that particular document, that text, the ideas shared by Jefferson, calling them to the floor as utterly wrong, not just morally and ethically, but factually wrong. So he called out Jefferson's ignorance on history. He called out his idea or his use of words in referring to the slave as not human. He talked about the long-standing implications of that, right? Um, Also, something else that I picked up in his tone, one of defense. He went on the defense. Um, he kept going back to, like, what are they saying? That we have no souls? What are they saying? That we are, just these empty vessels? I think I saw him state, like, are we not men? Um, you know, have we no souls in our body? Right. So that again just speaks to his tone of what in the world is going on here. And it's interesting. Let me go ahead and stop share for a second. It's interesting that he responded in writing the way he did at such a time in history that he did turn the slave narrative on its ear. What you see with David Walker is one of the earliest forms of Black nationalism. So where before the slave narrative was focusing on winning over the white audience, my goal is to kind of win them over. So because them and them alone have the power to really do something about this. David Walker takes that out of, he takes that idea and he flips it and say, we need to take care of us, because if this is the line of thought that they have, we'll never truly get the freedom or justice, that, we're demanding. So previously, slave narrative was all about, directed towards a white or sympathetic audience. Here, he's calling out, when he says my brethren, when he says we, when he states, um, again, us, he uses these pronouns and this language to make it very clear that he's not speaking to them. He's making it very clear that no, I have a very targeted audience, and it's not that religious audience. Did you guys see how even in his tone or word choice, he's questioning who's really for them or against them? Because let me quickly go to this. He lays out, and then again, anytime we look at tone, we look at word choice. He says, I call upon the professing Christians. I call upon the philanthropist. I call upon the tyrant himself, to show me a page of history, either sacred or profane, on which a verse can be found, which maintains, these particular ideas that Thomas Jefferson was putting forward. But to say, I call upon the professing Christians, not just to say I call upon Christians. He's saying that there's some who profess to be Christians and some who are really Christians. So he even throws a monkey wrench in the idea that everyone isn't who they say they are. And in kind of making that distinction, again, he changes that game of the slave narrative. If the goal previously was not to antagonize the audience, oh, he definitely threw this out the window, right? It was at the time considered explosive, you guys. So I really like that in your responses, you picked up on the fact of what period we were in when he wrote this, um, how writing something like this put his life at danger, um, how writing something like this sparked legislation that prohibited slaves to read and write so they wouldn't be influenced to revolt or, take these calls of violence. So yeah, so again, we see that shift. Um, but in response to Thomas Jefferson's Notes on Virginia, again, which is historically been identified as early white supremacist manifestos. I want you guys to think about what we learned about how the past influences the future. Do you see any issues here in the past that is very real and prevalent to what we are facing in our future, or what we're facing even now in our present? Do you guys see anything that David Walker is talking about in this text that could easily be applied to 2020? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, there's a few things that came in. Oh, Jalea, I'm sorry. I added here when we talked about adjectives, you said resentful. That's a good word too. I like that. Absolutely. I said too, I feel like he had the "you tried it" attitude. He went to Thomas Jefferson like, you know, how dare you? So resentful, absolutely. Even when he talked about in calling out the Christian audience, he was like, so you think it makes sense that, you know, if we profess that God is our master, that God would be okay with me calling another man, just like I'm a man, master? Like, what gives him that, that title? What um, elevates him, to that particular position? So he questions a lot of Christian ideals in the text, which we know is somewhat the opposite of previously written slave narratives, where it's all about Christian ideals and tradition. So
Yeah, I like that. Like he compared it to the persecution of the Christians during the time of Jesus. Like
absolutely.
like the Romans, like that if you it would be just against God and
Yeah.
their religion to call somebody else their master.
Yeah.
And I also like how he challenged, like, this is your right, and do you not understand the
Yep.
very things that you said, with everybody having the right to be free and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and he also stated too, like, to add to that, Robin, he was like, it's a God-given right. Like, who bestows these rights upon us? So he was calling it out. Okay, he was calling out all of these, really the ideas again presented in Thomas Jefferson's manifesto, which in a way worked to make it okay to treat a particular group less than humans. That made it okay to accept, slavery. He almost tried to set it up as that's the way God intended it, right? So, but did you guys see how this resonates even today? As you guys were reading, did we see any similarities between what David Walker was discussing then and what we may be discussing now in terms of race?
Yeah, in a sense that it wouldn't work. I think he threatened that at some point, this is all gonna crash or come
Mhm.
down. And today it is,
Yeah,
like, with the protest and the vandalizing of stores and
yeah.
the present day revolt to government and inequality.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, Robin, because Christina Sharp in that chapter 1 you guys read, in talking about the wake and talking about her family's history, talking about her family's past, she was attempting to set up a pattern where the past tends to always loom over the future. There's kind of no getting away from that past. It tends to follow, that, the African American everywhere that they go. And this passed with Thomas Jefferson's Notes on Virginia. We are still fighting to assert, or humanity. The whole mantra Black Lives Matter came from this idea that someone once upon a time told you that they don't matter. Someone once upon a time told you that it's okay that if you consider them less than human. If you guys know, in the Thomas Jefferson Notes on Virginia, he even brought in science and saying like, oh, the smaller brain and the smaller this, all things factually, scientifically proven false. The fact that Thomas Jefferson held the credibility that he held, whether it was true or not, it was just what people bought into. So yeah, we're kind of still again fighting against that past idea that this group as a whole is kind of like this less than group, this tainted group, this group of let's say for instance in pulling in stereotypes, less intelligent, inferior. That was, do you guys know that idea was really endorsed by Thomas Jefferson? So the idea that David Walker is fighting against is, he's like, "Oh, we must at all costs stop this idea from spreading. We have to fight against it," because he could see down the line descendants, the descendants of those slaves are still carrying the burden that or at least this perception of being viewed as less than, as their lives not necessarily holding the same value or weight as everyone else. And it's very real, that it's rooted in history. It's rooted in the past. So we see that there. All right. I always talk a little bit longer than I want to, you guys. So forgive me on that, but I still want to get into this Sojourner Truth text, where we look at David Walker, but I want us to kind of also look at the flip side of, this whole idea of protest literature. So hold on one second really quickly. Let me share something with you guys. And Tasha, I saw your response. Although I didn't have it in time. I do see it, but we'll talk about it. Okay, don't worry about it. All right, let me pull up this link that I'm posting in our chat box. It's a very short, it was a speech delivered, by Sojourner Truth in 1851. So I'm just going to, again, give you guys the link. I want you guys to read it. It's very short, so it won't take us no time to get through. And we'll come out on the other end to discuss. All right, so you guys will click on that link and let me share where it should take us to. All right, so and as you guys see, if you look at the link, it's really, really short. So we'll read these few paragraphs very quickly and we'll come out on the other end to discuss. Do we all have access to the text? Are we all able to view it? Do we
Yes.
all have access to the text?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
All right, you guys, this is a relatively quick read. Is there anyone who needs a little extra time? Look, I barely heard that. Is there anybody who needs a little extra time? Do we need a little extra time?
I'm done.
Okay. All right, let's talk about it. You guys kind of get you get some background information right in that um, title. We know it's a speech. You guys see, so far we've looked at several speeches. Frederick Douglass, um, even though David Walker's is more of an appeal, it's almost given, it's almost presented as a speech. He's directly addressing the audience, kind of asking for that interaction. And we see that with Sojourner Truth. So we know that this speech was delivered in 1851, actively, at the time, the United States was actively in the throes of slavery. So we know historically what was going on. Uniquely, this particular speech was delivered at a women's convention in Akron, Ohio. And if we look at the date of 1851, how progressive is it that a slave, or I believe at this time she was a former slave, that she speaks at a women's convention in Akron, Ohio. So just like we were a little bit, I won't say, well, somewhat surprised by David Walker's attitude and, um, his delivery at a time when normally, African Americans could face violence, for resisting or revolting against the institution of slavery, right? It's almost also equally jarring to see that one of the speakers at a women's convention in 1851 is a former slave, an African American woman. So, in looking at the text, tell me some things that you guys notice about the text as you're reading. So, where I asked with the last text, what was the most compelling part of the speech? Let me ask you guys that. When you were reading the text, what what point did the author make that you found to be the most compelling? Or
Well,
shall I
it
say
showed.
there? I'm sorry, go ahead, Tasha.
I'm sorry.
That's
Well, I was going to say that she was just talking about how women's rights. That's what mainly she
yep,
was pointing towards to, and that men feel that women don't deserve any rights, and that women, well, that how men and women should get the same opportunity
yep.
as men.
Absolutely. She makes that very clear. And she's directly addressing, you see, she talks to white men and she talks to black men. So she's addressing both groups, you know, um, and she's using their arguments as to why women have been excluded. She's using their argument against them, right? She's almost responding to that argument, similar to what David Walker was doing in the appeal, where he's responding to Thomas Jefferson's argument of, you know, slaves as inferior, slaves as humans, slaves as animals, right? So she's again responding. But I like how you brought up women's right, and we again can see that in the title. But one thing, um, slave narratives never wavered on. They were always supposed to be political statements. Even when the intended audience, of course, were those quick Christian, the white Northern abolitionists, even when writing to a white audience, the goal was still the same. It was to make some change in, if not policy, if not law, um, you know, changing the minds of the reading audience. So there's always this idea of politics in not only slave narrative, but also African American literature. It shows up again and again. We saw it in the Sterling Brown poem, The Riverbank Blues. He brought up how slaves are being left out of the discussion. You're getting relegated to the corner, poor living conditions, right? So he was talking about economics. We saw that, David Walker in the text that we just read, he's talking about racial justice. He's talking about warding off, um, injustices. Um, and in this text, Sojourner Truth is talking about women's rights. So uh, every text, one way or another, they are taking upon or attempting to further a cause, a political or social cause. So we see that. Um, we talked about tone a moment ago, and we talked about David Walker's tone. What are you guys able to pick up on Sojourner Truth's tone in this? Are you guys
Like
able to identify a tone? How would we describe her tone?
I would say like a little sassy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sassy. Okay, so I'm not gonna add. I'm sorry, Robin. Look, I get a little excited, you guys. Sometimes I want to just really go in, but sassy, and I'll let you guys add before I add to that. But I definitely see her personality. So yeah, sassy. I
Mhm.
see it play out in her speech, even how she interacted with the audience, right? When she was like, "What's that thing in the head?" Like, "Oh yeah, honey." So you can kind of tell um, through her tone, we can kind of pick up on her sassy attitude. Good. What else?
Serious.
Serious, absolutely.
Confident.
Positive.
Confident.
Confident. Yeah, I like that too. Absolutely. Think of the confidence that it takes to, at this time, 1851, and especially what we've just read about Sojourner Truth in terms of her experience. She has firsthand experience with the ills of slavery. She talked about um, her children being sold off to slavery, her kind of dealing with that pain, a mother's grief. But she's still, serious. She's still focused. She still confidently makes her case, right? Yeah, we see that.
I think it had a rhythm to it too. It was kind
Yeah.
of like poetically
Good. I
poetic.
like that too. Especially as we think about what we've learned in our reading of the Black vernacular tradition. So, where you just talked about the rhythm of the prose here, poetic, right? We know that directly links to the Black vernacular. We see culture making its way into the discussion. And when I say that culture, it's that rhythm. So we talked about the influences of, jazz, blues, gospel, sermon. It almost too reads like a sermon, like she's at a
Mhm.
pulpit and, attempting to make a case. So we see those threads of, the Black vernacular tradition at play here. And in the um, week 3 module that I posted, there is a text by Zora Neale Hurston. And Zora Neale Hurston was from Eatonville, Florida. So she a lot of times would write in what is called the Southern dialect. We kind of see um, evidence of it here. So you see where, Sojourner Truth, she uses language that uniquely places her in, let's say the South, right? It really speaks to the language, again, within the culture. So we see twixt, we see ain't I, the whole title, ain't I a woman, right? Um, even though I'm not going as far to say that slang is Black culture, um, but the drama a lot of times that's added to language, it's infused, it's part of the Black vernacular, that Black uh tradition, where we infuse not only our music, not only the writing, not only the art, not only even the like I said, music, writing, art, you know every aspect of Black culture, it's infused with passion. It's infused with drama. It's infused with, um, these, what can I call them? These nuances that always points back to the culture. So we see again to, just to play on language. We talked about her sassiness, That's too is attached to the Black vernacular tradition. So all of it that we've kind of talked about, we see it at play here. It even goes as deep as the language that's used in the text. So if you guys have not yet read the um, handout in our week 3 module, now keep in mind, let me preface that handout. It's 26 pages. I do not want you guys to read all 26 pages, but I do want you to read the characteristics of expression. So there's a portion, I think it's like the first 5 pages, are all going into detail about this vernacular tradition, how it's infused in the language that a lot of times you'll find in Black literature. So we see that again. I want to point out, ain't I a woman? Uh, Sometimes the use of this language helps in making the point, right? So we see that here. Um, One last thing I wanted to ask you guys about this before we I wrote it down, make sure I don't forget it. In her attempt to make her argument to the Black and white man, so which I find it interesting that at this particular time she didn't also address the white audience, white female audience, because we know that there has been disconnects between the uh, women's rights movement, suffragette, and the Black women's rights movement. Somehow the two had, got separated. But here you see Sojourner Truth in giving this at the Women's Convention. She is directly addressing men, those who are in the position to make decisions. So absolutely can see that. So when she's addressing the white man, how does she make her point? So she says, you know, um, she kind of brings it up to, if you say that the woman is the most, precious, um, gift that God gives to men, then wouldn't you want to protect her rights? Wouldn't you, want her to have the same rights that you have, right? So she's appealing to their argument. Women are these dainty, um, you know, uh, characters, they must be protected. They must be, she's like, okay, well then protect us, protect those rights that you say, or that, you know, should be, given to women as well, should be shared with women. So she appeals to that. How does she appeal to the African American male population? What did you guys pick up on her argument with that? What is she responding to in her direct address to African American men?
That she just as strong, she can work as hard, she can eat as much, like, in what way can you compare her as not being equal?
Exactly. Yeah. So she laid out a case of equality. That's really important in the women's rights movement. Um, I've done all the same things. She's like, I worked just as hard, born children, did X, Y, and Z. And that was a very compelling point. But when she spoke to Black men specifically, she said, then that little man in black there. Oh, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. She's talking about clergy, that little man in black there. She's talking about the pastors, the preachers, those who feel like God himself wanted women to be, um, under man. So yeah, so she again addresses that debate. So you're absolutely right, Robin. When I'm talking about black, I just kind of attached myself to that word. She's really talking about clergy. So the argument she made in terms of clergy is, okay, so you said that God, never intended for women to be, have the same rights as men. That is the argument. She's like, well, Jesus himself came from a woman and God, not me, not man. Man didn't have anything to do with that. So if that's the argument that you're making, then a woman would be God's chosen before man would be, because men was totally left out of the creation, if you will, of Jesus Christ. So I like that. Just like David Walker, in some cases, just like we see all the time in slave narrative, there's always a response to what is, going on in society. Um, and we see that here. Again, she made really compelling arguments. Look at how she closed. She said, and hold on, she said, if the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. So she's playing to, if she's talking to men in clergy, let's say the priest, where she says men in black, then she's talking about, the Virgin Mary. And she's like, it all began with her. So if it all started with women, we should again return to women, um, if we want it to be, improved or turned around. Then she says, obliged to you for hearing me. And now old Sojourner ain't got nothing more to say. So again, this closing that reestablishes the speaker, reestablishes, if you will, the weight behind the speaker. Now, normally we open up with some type of context about the speaker. I didn't get a chance to get a whole lot about Sojourner Truth, but just to give you guys this background, she's an abolitionist. So, and she was a very prominent abolitionist. So her word has weight in this audience of other, women abolitionists, right? So we see that where she said, now old Sojourner ain't got nothing more to say. But the fact that her ideals or her particular points were being made all on the um, back of her credibility, who she was. So she's an abolitionist, she's a minister, she's a women's rights activist. Um, She was born 1797, died 1883. So she did see the Emancipation Proclamation. She did see the abolishment of slavery and played a part in that through her activism. So her and David Walker, if you remember the timeline, they were existing and living at the exact same time. Now he, of course, passed away earlier than her, but this attitude that we talked about that she exudes in her writing and the attitude that he exudes in his writing, that may be very telling to what was going on at that time, right? There was a forum for those particular voices to be heard. And it came from, again, the abolitionist movement. And we know that slave narrative itself was rooted in that abolitionist movement. So, okay, with that being said, let me go ahead and close out for today. This is pretty much where I wanted to end it. But with homework, still read through what we have in the module. Again, whether we discuss the information or not in class, students are responsible for the readings, the assignments. If it is in the module, I am assuming that you guys are reading it. So you may be asked about it, at any particular time. Not to say I'm pop quizzing you guys, but just if it's in the module, there is an expectation that students did read it, they did review it. So make sure you guys are staying on top of your modules. In preparation for Monday's class next week, make sure you guys read that Zora Neale Hurston text. And in it is characteristics of Negro expression. Only read that section. It's about 5 pages long. Do not read the full 26 pages. And also check out this W.E.B. Du Bois short video where now we're transitioning into these two worlds. Before it was the slave operating in, existing in the slave of, in the world of the white audience. Here, W.E.B. Du Bois, he introduces us to the two worlds of thoughts. Not only, what we present to the white world, but also what we internally hold on to. So where David Walker asked the question, have we no souls in our body? W.E.B. Du Bois, he responded with the book, The Souls of Black Folk, and it attempts to kind of give a inside look at the mind of, the African American. So we definitely are going to talk about that on Monday. Make sure you guys do that and pick up the Zora Neale Hurston. There are additional readings that I'll add. So look for an announcement on that. But other than that, let me go ahead and get you guys out of here. We're about 3 minutes over. So if you guys have any questions, just stay a little bit over, but let me go ahead and close now. Thank you guys so much for participating today. A really good discussion. So thank you guys for that. All right, if you have a question, stay. If not, you guys are free to go. Enjoy your weekend. Look for updates on the Brightspace course page. I'll send out announcements. I think there's just one more additional reading, but other than that, you guys have the module to work through.
Goodbye, everybody. Have a great weekend.
All right, you too, Robin. Have a good one.